Well, the biggest change happened within a week of me turning in the final draft with the start of the Ukraine war. Luckily, the publisher allowed me to go in and change a few verb tenses. So it was instead, Russia will do this inevitably and almost imminently into, Russia started this last February and here's where we are. The key thing to remember, though, is that the prediction of the Ukraine war wasn't just from this book, it was from previous books as well. And when you have deglobalization really kick in, it's only one of three conflicts. So we do have two others that are just around the corner that are going to be just as disruptive.
Which would be what?
Now that the United States is no longer in the Persian Gulf in any meaningful way, the Saudis and the Iranians are edging ever closer to a direct fight, and that's going to catch half of the world's globally traded oil in the crossfire. And then whether it's because the Chinese lash out or implode, we're going to have another conflict in the East Asian Rim with the Chinese and the Japanese being the primary belligerents. And then that's the end of global manufacturing as we understand it. Well, let me give you the punchline first. This is China's last decade as a coherent nation state. So we're going to be very soon talking about Chinese weakness and the effects of China's disintegration. But let me give you three big reasons. First of all, like that chapter that you quoted, there is nothing that is made in China that can't be made anywhere else. And because their demographics have been aging so aggressively for so long, their labor costs are now about 3 times what the labor costs of Mexico are. And Chinese labor is not as highly skilled as Mexican labor. So we've already seen the hemorrhaging out of the industrial space, most notably to Mexico and Vietnam, but some to the United States as well. In fact, the United States is competing on some of these sectors that we honestly had given up on, because now with the shale revolution, our energy prices are the lowest in the world, our electricity prices are the lowest in the world. So we're in this weird world where the United States excels at the high end and the low end at the same time, while the Mexicans take care of everything in the middle. It's a very successful system, and it's outcompeting the Chinese on most metrics. Second, the Chinese do not have the naval capacity to push out from their own coast. Yes, they've got a lot of vessels, but only about 10% of them can sail more than 1,000 miles from the coast. And that assumes no one's shooting at them and they're going slow to save fuel. Really, the operational range for the Chinese Navy is only about 300 miles. So they can't get past Vietnam, much less to the Persian Gulf if there's an energy crisis. And then third, back to those demographics. Since the book came out, the Chinese have been updating bit by bit their census data, and they've now come to the public conclusion that they overcounted their population by in excess of 100 million people, with all of those missing millions aged 40 and under. If that is true, and I can't imagine that they'd be bad-mouthing themselves to make themselves look good. I mean, the logic of that's weird. If that's true, we are talking about the fastest workforce and population decline ever in human history. And we don't even have an economic model as a species for what will work with a Chinese system just 5-10 years from now, because they won't have enough people to do the work, and they certainly won't have enough people to consume. And that leaves them completely dependent upon whether the United States wants to import stuff from them. And it's become very clear in our politics under both Trump and Biden that the answer to that is no. In a word, capriciousness. Chairman Xi of the CCP has now gutted the system so wholly that there is no longer any institution within the system that has any authority aside from him, his person. The CCP is a shell of what it used to be. The analysts are gone. The intelligence officials who are intelligent are gone. He has executed or imprisoned or intimidated into silence everyone within the PRC who's capable of conscious thought. It's a one-man show now. And so policy reflects what he says on any given day, and then the bureaucrats take it one of two directions. Number one, they wait to be personally told what to do, so we get scoliosis. Or two, they're zealots and they think they're doing what he wants, and that's how you get people out in EV suits, dusting runways with virusicide in order to disinfect them during COVID. So the ability of this country to carry out functional policy is now gone. And it's down to the whims of one man with a bureaucracy that doesn't know what to do with that. We're seeing organizational failure in real time. It's something worth considering, because the whole idea of how we fought the Cold War is we created globalization to patrol the ocean so that anyone could ship anything anywhere and interact with any partner and access our market. That's how the world rebuilt itself after World War II. And that was the deal that Nixon handed to Mao himself in China in order to get the Chinese to switch sides in the Cold War, and it worked. But China's too big now, and the rest of the world is too aged now. And that deal was never going to last much longer than 1992. Honestly, it's a surprise it's lasted this long. Xi, as the leader of a one-man state, theoretically does have the power to completely change course. But the sacrifices that China would have to give to the United States economic and strategically to attract American interest in some sort of New Deal, I don't see that happening. We're going through our own period of isolationism here in the United States, and China bashing has become a very strong bipartisan point of agreement in American politics. It's one of the few. Well, something to keep in mind about Americans, especially white Americans, is they have a real hard time telling different ethnic groups apart. If you remember back to 9/11, most of the people who were getting attacked were Hispanic because Americans didn't know the difference. So anytime you see actions by Americans in that vein, you gotta look through it. You gotta look at that very, very closely.
It's ignorance.
So I think that's probably a better word to use than hatred or intolerance. And one of the things we have seen that has really impressed me of late, well, let me give you two things. Number one, with the Ukraine war, American charity towards Ukraine has just caught me off guard. The degree of effort, not just by the government, but by private citizens and firms to stand with the Ukrainians. And second, say what you will about the rest of his politics. One of the great successes of the Trump administration was convincing Americans, especially conservative Americans, that Mexicans were part of the family. So we are capable of these huge leaps forward in terms of social unity, and we usually don't even acknowledge it until 30 years later. He did during the campaign, and then within 1 year of being in office, he was talking about Mexicans no longer as bad hombres and drug runners and rapists, but as some of the greatest adherents to the American dream. And under Trump, believe it or not, relations between Mexico and the United States were the best they have ever been in the history of either republic. Fact is way stranger than fiction. Okay, well, this is going to be guesswork because everyone's spies have been killed. But best guess.
You meaning North Korea has killed all of the foreign spies in and around the country?
Everyone's spy, even the Chinese. So everyone is just kind of making an educated guess here, and more or less everyone's on the same page, but no one's really sure. So the best guess is Kim Il-sung. That's the grandfather, the guy who fought the Japanese, founded the country. When he passed on, and the power went to Kim Jong-un, or Kim Jong-il, this guy, the crazy one. Kim Jong-il was raised in North Korea on the propaganda, and as a result, it broke him, and the guy is clinically nuts. So is the entirety of the second generation. So the remaining generals from the first generation were like, oh, holy crap, we did not mean for this to happen. So they sent the whole third generation, including Kim Jong-un, out into the world to learn how it really works. So Kim Jong-un actually went to school in Switzerland.